autonomous learning. Lessons are more strategic as they are given well-guided questions and discussions are presented in a Socratic manner. Oral teaching is to the minimum as students are encouraged to learn from each other and from own interpretations and research. Thank you.
Hi. And as stated before, one of the questions most frequently asked about schooling in America is how we value education. Compared to other nations, we're not even in comparison. Due to this, our children are not prioritizing their schooling. Students spend the average of 7.5 hours using entertainment technology compared to spending a minimum of 6 hours of school in a day. With the access to cell phones and video games and internet, students can get off track easily and push aside their schoolwork. In addition, there has also been many lack of understanding across the nation. Take the Common Core, for example. Despite having been adopted more than 4 years ago in nearly every state and covered with thousands of new articles per month for well over a year, vast swaths of the American public report not knowing about any of the standards. Other questions that arise in how people maximize educational opportunities in America. As stated before, technology can be distracting, but it's also a good educational tool. Educational technology, including iPads, QR codes, and Google Drive, which helps create a connecting classroom and also provide other learning opportunities for our students. In 2013, the survey by the Office of Education and Technology says that 75% of the teachers are seeing benefit from educational technology for students. 2/3 of the teachers say that technology allows them to do more than ever, and that there are more available resources and multiple study tools, including educational videos, web quests, and games. After-school programs also help maximize educational opportunities. The data collected by the After-School Alliance shows that 67% of the participants brought up their grades on tests. Students enrolled in various of after-school activities and summer learning programs offered by Project Exploration, based off in Chicago, Illinois, were found to graduate at a rate of 95% more, nearly doubling the overall rate of those attending Chicago public schools. Overall in America, we have educational opportunities that have the potential to create better and brighter and bolder students with the capabilities for critical thinking and great workmanship. However, the value of education in our country, we are limiting ourselves from our limitless possibilities.
For our project, we visited multiple schools around JCPS, and the main theme that showed up in each school was responsibility. The teachers made their students accountable to independence, to choose how to spend class time and to study on their own outside of class. These classes are truly treated like a college environment, where they are in charge of their own education, their own future. Manual students are a wonderful example of how people value education. It's an honor to go to Manual, and Manual knows this by implementing rigorous requirements to ensure their future potential enrollment. Here's a question for you. At an audition, do you perform to the best of your ability from beginning to end? Manual is a constant audition, and you're not truly accepted until you walk across the stage at graduation. The different programs offered at these schools challenge the curriculum in terms of readiness to make sure students are prepared for the future. Atherton's IB program's key purpose is to develop well-rounded students. They implement a community service requirement, ensuring they're active in the community. Freightos Cambridge program allows students to share different perspectives about world issues, to be active and vocally ready to speak their opinions and ideas. Overall, maximizing education and its value goes hand in hand. You can't maximize your education unless it's truly wanted. They can offer it, but the responsibility is yours. JCPS students have the ability, want, and potential to achieve and excel in both. Thank you.
Board Member Linda Duncan and Assistant Superintendent Amy Dennis, please come forward to congratulate the Fairdale High School students for their outstanding presentation. Joining in the recognition is their teacher, Mary Kinzer, Assistant Principal Brandy Corbin, and Principal Brad Weston. And I would like to ask the parents of these outstanding students to please stand to be recognized. Thank you. Now, please join me in viewing a video montage of District 5 schools.
I am a big advocate of movement in school. Movement obviously is one factor to help the circulation in the body. They have some fun, and then they're ready to learn.
This is Fraser Elementary, and this is our 11th annual I Love to Read Day.
We're Fraser Elementary, and we love to read.
Hazelwood Elementary uses the unique Smart Moves program to stimulate the minds of their students to prepare them for the school day.
We are at Bright and Sunshine Kenwood Elementary, where we're ready to open the first day of school. We've been preparing all summer to make sure that all of our staff members are ready. We have 11 buses that come here to Kenwood. All of our tags are already ready to go, and so that we can make sure that every child gets home safe.
We are at Medora Elementary, and what we're doing is making a tree. We're painting a tree for our environment.
At Medora Elementary, Trees Louisville has actually partnered with JCBE to plant about 80 different trees.
Maya Angelou was a famous playwright, teacher, civil rights activist, poet, filmmaker, and dancer.
We're at Simple Elementary, and we are having our annual Living Wax Museum.
I'm Muhammad Ali.
I am Sojourner True.
I am Rosie the Riveter.
The Olmsted Academy is part of our equestrian club program. We offer an after-school program that children can come out and take a field trip or have a club meeting out here at the horse stable and actually get some hands-on time with the horses.
1 and 2 and 3, 4. Make sure you input that on your iPad.
We're using the iPads for app testing. We've been learning how to read and write music.
The kids in the engineering department at Iroquois High School decided to come up with this idea, and the board approved it, so we started on it. And at the same time, we realized that Fairdale High School kids with the heavy equipment science could collaborate with us and move the dirt and put it to where we want it.
We're basically building the trenches, running the heavy equipment.
The engineering kids have to come up with exactly how many blocks they need, how many tons of 57 rock that they need, or things like that. How much dirt was calculated, how much we were going to need, how many trucks we were going to bring out.
We have a federal credit union as opposed to a bank in our school, which means that federal credit unions have members. We have 2 branches here at Southern High School. We have this main branch, which is the larger of the 2, and we have one smaller branch that the students are able to use.
Whenever the credit union first opened, it made me want to join because it was hands-on experience.
Dr. Hargens and members of the Jefferson County Board of Education, this concludes our recognitions for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robinson. So I want to thank the students, their teachers, principals, all the parents and family members who supported all of this. It is wonderful to be here in District 5. Ms. Duncan, thank you so much for helping get this organized. It's a great opportunity. Before we do what we always do at this point in the program, which is to invite students who have homework to do and parents and others who would like to leave to do so, I want to recognize that we have at least 3 other elected officials with us tonight who I want to recognize. Senator Syme is here with us. Representative Donahue, I believe, is with us. Representative Donahue, there you go. And Councilwoman Welsh is also here. Councilwoman. Thank you so much. It is really important to our schools that we have the support from other political branches and other leaders in the community. So thank you all for being here tonight. We'll now take a couple-minute break. Anyone who would like to leave may do so, and I'm really sorry that the board has to follow those wonderful performances because we're going to be very boring in comparison. Thank you all. Oh yeah, and if anyone's interested, I'm taking off my jacket because it's getting hot, so feel free. The fun part of the meeting may be behind us. It was wonderful to hear from the students in so many different forms. The first item of business is that the board has to vote to receive the recognitions that were just performed. Ms. Duncan, I believe, moves it. I'll second it. All in favor? Aye. Passes unanimously. Great. Second is a vote to approve the agenda. Is there such a motion? Okay, Ms. Horn moves, Ms. Porter seconds, all in favor. That also passes unanimously, thank you. Next are the minutes of the March 22nd meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Mr. Brady moves, Dr. Wilner seconds, all in favor, passes unanimously. Great. It's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Hargens to give the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Jones and members of the board, for this opportunity to present the superintendent's report. I'd like to set a context for today's work, or for tonight's work. The district has not shied away from scrutiny. We began the journey of improvement with a comprehensive curriculum management audit in the summer of 2011. Remember, the purpose of that audit was to intentionally disrupt the connection between poverty and low achievement. The first recommendation was released that October, and that they said to reorganize to support student learning, and we were ready to do that for the 12-13 school year. The board received the curriculum management audit report from Dr. John Murdoch on January 23rd, 2012. Beyond recommendation number 1, there were 9 other recommendations presented to us in the order of criticality. So job number 1 was get the organization right. 2 was begin to improve board policies. 3 was get a planning process in place, which resulted in Vision 2015. Then 4 through 8 were get the instructional infrastructure right. 9 was look at the lens of equal access of services and opportunities to students. And finally, 10 was develop a 3-year plan that aligns district and building level resources. It was actually recommendation number 10 that said do a compensation review. So the board received information about the compensation review today in a work session, and they will be asked to receive it officially during this meeting. This is a critical first step, answering the question, does our compensation structure provide internal and external equity for our employees? So let me thank everyone, every stakeholder who will be involved and engaged for the thoughtful and deliberate thinking about what will follow. So back to the timeline. Vision 2015 was adopted in 11-12. That was our guide for 12-13, 13-14, 14-15, and half of this year. So it was our guide for 3.5 years. After months of stakeholder involvement in its development, in December, the board approved Vision 2020, the guide to our next level of improvement. A school district in Pewaukee says, a strategic plan creates a system to improve student achievement. The strategic planning process creates a vision for the school district and a process to reach that vision. So we are now focusing on execution of Vision 2020. And there are 3 key components to execution. There needs to be an initiative blueprint or plan for every initiative. There needs to be a dashboard so that we can report to the board and community where we are. And there always needs to be monitoring, a cross-functional monitoring team. So we created a project management timeline, and you will see this every time I speak at board meetings. So I will bring you evidence of the deployment of the strategies in Vision 2020. We are tracking deployment daily and weekly on this project management timeline at the cabinet level. So let's look at just some progress and some evidences. Strategy 1.1.7 says eliminate achievement, learning, and opportunity gaps. I'm proud to tell you that Diallo Thornton, a more traditional school student, has won the National Harper Lee's Writing Contest. The National Harper Lee's Writing Contest, because he had an opportunity in Jefferson County Public Schools. He participated in our Renaissance program that connects students to contemporary literature. Remember that students in kindergarten through 5th grade had the opportunity to attend JCPS spring break camps, a part of Literacy and we'd like to show you or let you hear from a couple of students.
My name is Albert Bledsoe, and I go to Kennedy Montessori, and I am in 2nd grade. I attended literacy and photography. I learned about Gordon Parks. One thing that I learned about Gordon Parks was he took pictures of this lady, and she had grandchildren, and he took pictures to give her more money.
My name is Nina Faust. I go to Coach Taylor Montessori. I'm in 4th grade. I attended literacy and photography. We went across the street to Central High School, and we took pictures, and I took pictures of signs, cars, birds, and flowers.
My name is Micaiah. My school is big, and I'm in 4th grade. During literacy and photography, we have been answering questions and going back to the text. And in photography, we've been going outside and doing a photo walk.
My name is Kylos, and I go to Brandeis Elementary, and I am in 2nd grade. I attended literacy and photography. I learned that if you didn't have goals, you wouldn't challenge yourself for anything. Photography is not just of taking pictures, it's art too.
My name is Kaylin Booker. I am in 2nd grade, and I go to Coach Taylor Montessori. We took pictures, I took pictures of cars.
Ms. Gilpin, that's good. Okay, so if you didn't hear...
My name is Ashton Forbes. I go Vic Elementary, and
If you didn't hear Marcos, he said you've got to have goals to be able to achieve them. And the students actually read about a famous photographer, and then they not only read about it, but they got to actually take pictures and become a photographer. So that's part of the literacy and. And the other thing I want to remind you is that a draft timeline is in process of being developed to launch an academy for males of color in 1718. So strategy 3.2.1 is engage with families. Have no fear, the flash dads are here. JCPS partnered with community dads who guaranteed to surprise schools and students by just showing up and cheering on staff, students, and parents as they start their day. At Rangeland Elementary School, over 70 dads showed up, hugged, high-fived, and helped all who entered to have a great day. Strategy 2.2.4 is about developing leaders. The National Institute for School Leadership, or NISL, participants, they graduate ready to lead more effectively and implement best practices in education in schools, improve classroom instruction, and raise student achievement. You can see in 14-15, we had 23 participants, add 30 more this year, 15-16, and we're going to launch, thank you Dr. Branham for your work, and Dr. Wright, 16-17, 25 participants from our priority schools, and add 25 to 30 more additional participants who will begin in June 2016. And NISL is a research-based best practice leadership, nationally recognized leadership development program. We're proud to have 6 certified NISL facilitators, and you can see their names on the screen. That really is 7. Oh, Jan McDowell's twice. It really is 6. And you can see that our principals working through the National Institute for School Leadership. And strategy 3.2.2, just to share one more, is to improve and standardize systems. And as you know, we launched our new website on April 19th. It is more user-friendly and built on a state-of-the-art content management system. The box on the very top, if you click it, will translate our website into different languages. And we're proud to say that our website does now contain a page for committee work to post information about all the committees. So Chair Jones, this concludes my report and some progress on the deployment of Vision 2020, and my recommendation for approval of the consent agenda later in this meeting.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hargens. There are no action items, so the next item is item 8, information items. The first is a report on the classification and compensation analysis. And before that, there is one speaker on this subject, Bo Johnson. Bo Johnson, Mr. Johnson, please come forward. I think, yeah, come on up to the microphone right here. And as you're on your way, I'll just read once the board policy 1.421. It's actually not the policy, but the summary of it. The board expects that persons who have signed up to address the board will limit their remarks to the subject that they are listed at the time they signed up, that their presentation will not include any defamatory or abusive remarks about that subject, and that they will present their remarks in a manner that is consistent with the orderly conduct by the board of its business. You will have 3 minutes to talk. At the end of 2.5, there will be 1 bell, and at the end of 3, there will be 2 bells. And I apologize for blabbing before you get started. So thank you for being with us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. This won't take very long. Again, my name is Bo Johnson. I'm a union representative for ASME, which we represent about 3,500 classified employees here for your district. I just want to speak a little bit about the classification analysis. I had a brief few minutes to review it.
Pull the mic up just a little bit. Perfect. Thank you.
I only had a brief minute to review it. But what I found is that by reading that JCBE pays premium salaries for its higher paid positions in administration. What about the employees who cannot make ends meet and that takes care of their families? They take care of our kids, but a lot of them can't afford to take care of their own kids. This is not fair to the thousands of employees that barely make livable wages. Read in the survey, it says, you say that the goal, and I quote, is to achieve salary reconciliation, to have an open, collaborative discussion with employees about different ways to achieve this. Well, with ASME, we're ready to help. We held a rally a few weeks ago, similar about this, about some salary and wage fairness. Well, the turnover rate for the classified employees here in the district is hundreds a year. I mean, we're not paying our classified employees enough to stay. We all want to address these issues and fix it. We start our contract negotiations May 9th, and what we're asking for is a fair and adequate salary for these classified employees. In the survey, it says some numbers about if you make under $14 an hour, possibly raised, but we would like to be a part of those discussions and come with ideas, because we all know that this is a problem across the district. These classified employees, along with other employees, they're the ones that are taking care of our kids. They're the ones that are teaching our kids. I won't say where I heard this from, but it was a quote. The district is competing with fast food restaurants to hire employees. A lot of them have better benefits, better packages, better wages. The only difference is you get a free sundae at a fast food restaurant. So we need to keep these people employed. Keep them, the pay scale for when they start out is just too low. We understand we need to increase a lot of things. We're here right now. We like to be here. That's where they need to be. We don't expect to go from here to here in a matter of a year or two, but we need to see improvement. There was a lot of people out front of Van Hoos. Clearly, they're unhappy, and we'd appreciate some movement and some open dialogue during these next contract negotiations. Let's do the right thing and finally give the classified employees their dignity and respect they deserve, so they can take care of their family and kids as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Okay, I believe, Mr. Hudson, are you going to come up and talk to us now?
Yes,
do you want to introduce?
So we'd like to recommend that the board accept the report that you saw in the work group tonight.
Closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. How's that? Better. So we'd like to recommend that the board accept the report that we gave this afternoon from the Community Advisory Committee, and take the the data that was there and understand that there's no action required tonight, but that we have a lot of work to do to figure out how we put in a performance pay system that's fair and equitable to everybody, including our friends at ASME as well. So that's the recommendation.
Okay. Is the report itself or your analysis of it up on the website now?
Yes. There are 3 documents there. There's the PowerPoint, the full PowerPoint that all of you have seen. There's the 995-page study that lists job title by job title. And then there's a report about how the different classifications fit into the job grades that are shown on that report.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Hudson that we didn't already address? If not, is there a motion to receive the report? Okay, Ms. Duncan moves. Is there a second? Okay, Ms. Porter seconds. All in favor, aye. Any opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Mr. Hudson. The next report is on, wait a minute, sorry. The next is, sorry, I've confused myself a little bit. Okay, the next is an update on the budget development process. And before that, we have one speaker, and that is Chris Harmer. Mr. Harmer, welcome. You have 3 minutes, 1 bell after 2.5 and 2 after 3.
Thank you.
Begin when ready.
Good evening. My name is Chris Harmer. I'm co-chair of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, which represents 1,500 households in Jefferson County. Just a quick Derby reminder to you all that it's time to figure out what bets to make. And with JCPS, we're talking about items on the budget, and you'll be placing those bets next month in your board meetings with your votes. Having been active in the community process for Vision 2020 last year, I'm hoping that you'll be rigorously evidence-based and double down on successful programs we have to attack learning gaps between student groups, and also to place new bets on programs proven elsewhere. Things like full-day pre-K, not just, or in addition to the kindergarten boot camp, literacy programs, not just for K through 3 initiatives, which are already on, which we're going to be reviewing this evening, but also for middle and high school students whose reading problems hold them back from learning and preparing for college and trades. And lastly, of course, for teaching behavior and building learning-friendly climate in the schools, a subject you've gotten a lot of attention tonight, and we'll be hearing more about programs like restorative practice, PBIS, trauma-informed care, and socio-emotional learning. After Vision 2020 was passed in December, I was thrilled to see a well-intentioned effort made to shift money and resources to those areas. Ultimately, it only freed up about $6 to $7 million. That's a lot of money, but that's less than 1% of the budget. Tonight, the CBO Hudson presented options to freeze and reallocate some administrative salary increases, which were apparently maybe above comparable salaries in similar districts. I'm sure the actual monies freed up will shrink as the plan is reviewed and finalized. That's not a failure by any means. But my urgent request is this: JCPS board, press the superintendent, the CBO, and the rest of the staff to identify what they would do more of if they had the resources. Challenge them on those, let them provide the evidence, and then add that money into the budget for the best of those bets. If savings and transfers don't come through, or other services don't fully materialize in August, you can exercise your authority to raise the tax rate. FOR and its members would support your investment in evidence-based programs in areas just like this. Just don't make this a zero-sum game. A year and a half ago, a consultant told you that the best bet would be to reduce achievement gaps would be investment in full-day pre-K education for all. That would be $200 million. We need to start paying down on that. Please make those bets so all the students win. Thanks so much, and have a good Derby.
Thank you, Mr. Harmer. Okay, you want to introduce the update, or?
The tentative budget comes to the board for approval the second meeting in May. We're going to do a work session the first meeting in May. So this is just a brief update on where we are with the process.
Sorry, the screen is. So this just looks at draft budget revenue of $1.173 billion, less a beginning fund balance of $111 million for receipts of $1.02 billion. And then the expenses of the draft budget are $1.173 billion, less a contingency of 2% of $108 million, net expenses of $1.065. So expenses are over the revenue. Then we went to work and on the expenses, and we pulled $6.3 million out of school reductions, forecast savings and salaries of approximately $3 million, less central office reductions of 2.9, net adjustments after the draft of 2.7, and an E-rate adjustment reimbursement, excuse me, of $1 million, and then an EC reimbursement of $400,000. So net expenses down to 1,048. Then the Vision 2020 board approvals of 7.6, which included some of the full day things that Mr. Harmer was talking about. Middle school redesign of 1.7 for total expenses of 1,058. So we now have $4.4 million revenue over expenses. And here are the pending budget requests. The top block are items that the superintendent has recommended for 2.676, and then the other pending items, which is the bottom 2/3 of the page, add up to 12. And so we have a wish list here of $15 million, and the 4.4 that we were talking about from the previous chart. If we in fact freeze COLA and do that, that would bring approximately $11 million to the bottom line, which would allow us to hit the expenses that we have here on the list that would satisfy some of what Mr. Harmer is talking about. Then we gave you a whole bunch of details there that we won't go into, but they're there for your reference.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions? Linda, you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question, and I think I may have mentioned this to Cordelia before, but when we're looking at equity, and we want equity with excellence, equity costs money. I mean, equity means that we are ready to commit money, extra money, to move toward that. Is there a way, do we have a fund that we can create or have created that when situations arise where students from one school can take a trip and students from another school can't because their parents can't pay for that, do we have a way for that to be funded so that we can really tap into that equity issue?
Provide additional funding for at-risk students, free and reduced children. So it's called the fee waiver. So those funds are used to help. Now, when it comes to the field trips that are such of maybe going to Texas for a cheerleading camp, those things at this point we do not have a fund for, but that is where schools usually have some fundraising activities. All students usually participate in that program. They're not obviously required to do so, but I think most of the participation does happen with kids all participating in an effort to provide the funding so that all children can participate. And it goes into one big fund. It is not dependent upon how much one child may raise versus another child. It goes into one pool of money for them then to use for that activity.
Okay. What about mental health? We have said that we are going to make that a priority. I mean, it's sounded like a priority in our priority school plans. Have we devoted any more money to mental health so that we can expand the number of counselors that we have?
We have some budget requests that have come through as far as for additional mental health counselors. And in addition, some of the restorative practice and the PBIS, some of those fundings would help towards helping children with the mental health issues and the challenges that they have in everyday life, not just in academics, but also in social bearings.
I'd just like to add that I had the opportunity to join Mary Gwen Wheeler and Kristen Wingfield, and we went to Buffalo to see Say Yes for Education and spent the day going through that. And Buffalo is a school district that has 55 schools. In 48 of their, and similar in demographics to ours, in 48 of the 55 schools they have mental health clinics. And so that gives you some idea of what could be done, but we don't have that level of funding now. Hopefully, as we do some of the things we talked about earlier tonight, we will be able to expand that, and then hopefully we'll get Say Yes to Education here, and we can corral the community resources to do the kinds of things that need to be done.
Very good.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, Diane, thank you.
Would you go back to the slide that showed pending and other projects on there, please? Dr. Harkins had recommended her recommendations and the items at the top. When you come back to us in May, will decisions be made about those items that are the superintendent has recommended, as well as the other items, yes or no, at that point when you come to us in May?
Yes, I think the first thing that needs to happen, Ms. Porter, is we need to understand what's going to happen to steps and COLAs that we'll talk about on the meeting on May 10th. When we have a decision one way or the other, then we'll be able to do a lot of the things that are on this entire page. If, on the other hand, that's not accepted, then we have $4.4 million to play with, and then the cabinet will have to have fistfights over how we're going to figure out where we spend $4.4 million when people want 15.
Okay, and then one other question. As school opens in the fall and we have placement of staff, some of the schools, particularly elementary schools, get a large amount of teachers that are K-tip and need extra evaluations. And as we talk about, I would like to go back to what Board Member Duncan said about if we're going to be better, sometimes it costs money, and the only way to get there is to putting the dollars and the people in place. And I guess this is not something that could be necessarily for the budget, but I would like to feel like that when school starts in the fall, if we have elementary schools with 10 plus new teachers in there and one principal and one assistant principals, that we have some kind of process in place to provide support to the schools that not only are priority schools but need improvement schools, because we will not get any better using the current formula, in my opinion. I'm one of 7, so I'm just voicing my one opinion, but it's important that we put our dollars and our people to where it needs to be for our students to learn and to progress academically, and I think that's a follow-up on what Board Member Duncan said. So I'm just putting that out there as a conversation piece to be continued, if you don't mind.
Right, and just to add to that, if I may, one of the things that's striking to me on my so-called listening tour is that school starts on day 1 and brand new teachers are starting on day 0. Apparently in the past we used to have 3 or 4 days where teachers could come in and get acclimated and really understand the community, and I want to be doing some of that for 16, 17, so that we don't have brand new people just walking into a class. I mean, I know they see it on the weekend, but they need to have more time to get acclimated and up to speed. So that would be one way of addressing part of that.
Okay. I appreciate that. That would be helpful as we start school, but during the course of the year, there are lots of evaluations and lots of paperwork that have to be done by the one instructional leader and the one assistant principal in elementary school. So I would just like for us to be willing to be bold and make some changes if we need to.
Perhaps we could get some teachers out of retirement to help.
I'm asking that we think all thoughts.
No,
Thank you.
A few points here real quick. I'm jumping ahead here a little bit. There's an item in the consent agenda that talks about our budget, but it seems to be that we're a little under where we would like to be at this point for our comparative revenues month by month. I know we're just a little bit and we'll probably jump up, but I'm curious to know, do we anticipate that coming back up? And the reason I'm asking, because I want to know if that's an impact where how we're planning for this budget.
We do anticipate it to come up. A lot of it has to do with timing differences. The state budget came through much better than what we had initially expected. So as far as right now, we are okay with the projections that we have for next year and where we are even this current year.
Okay, and two more issues. One, now that the state budget has been approved and voted on, has that impacted our budget? And if so, how have we adjusted for that?
It will impact our budget, yes. There are some areas, in particular, the one item that I am concerned about is Cara Preschool. They have, at this point, unless the governor does something different, they have taken it from 160% of the income level, poverty income, to 200%. Which, what that means is there is additional children that are going to be eligible for services, which is a good thing. However, it also gives us some challenges. We anticipate that could be up to 600 additional children. So we have a space issue. We also have a funding issue in that the legislatures did not increase the amount of money that is going into preschool, so therefore that will basically reduce the per pupil amount. So space is an issue, funding is an issue, so that's the one area. We're still not back to where we were on our flexible focus funds back to 2008 level, but we have been able to handle that and we're okay. So the major issue I would say I have is Cara Preschool. The per pupil amount did not reduce, and it did not, of course, increase. It stayed the same. The net effect of that will be that we will receive less state funding. However, because of the way this formula is set up, we will get additional revenue through property tax, assuming that the assessments are going to go up. And in my conversation with Tony Lindauer, our PVA, he has told me that he expects to have a pretty good assessment increase this year like we had last year. So hopefully with new construction and with assessments, we should be fine, and that's how we have forecasted.
Well, speaking as someone, excuse me, who got Tony's letter in the mail this week, I can tell you that yes, that is happening. The last point I want to make is, and I'm just going to put it here and we'll circle back to it later, but the follow-up on Member Duncan's point about mental health counselors, I too have a concern about that. However, I'll couch that right here, but also want to explain it in a little bit better context once we get up to our next presentation about trauma-informed schools. So just want to make a point here. Thanks.
Chuck?
Yeah, pardon me. I'm going to get in the weeds just a little bit, but I'm just searching for a little assurance. On the board approvals on March 22nd, we mentioned Valley Prep Middle School counselor and 2 middle school assistant principals. Those are going with the transition of the new middle school structure that we have also, right?
That's correct.
And have we already included a position for someone who is watching that progress? I forget the name of the position that we were creating. Project management. We have?
Yes.
Okay. And just curious, when did those cost centers change? Did they change on July 1st?
July 1st, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion to receive the update on the budget? Chris moves. Is there a second? Chuck seconds. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, 6-1. Next is a report on trauma-informed approaches to education. Dr. Hargens, you want to introduce?
Yes. One of the things that we want to do is create a system of support for students and to be proactive. So trauma-informed approaches are a way to be proactive to meet the needs of students so they can meet both our academic expectations and also our behavioral expectations. So Dr. Averett is going to give a brief presentation about things in place in our trauma-informed approaches. Dr. Averett.
Good evening, Dr. Hargens, Chair Jones, and members of the board. We appreciate the opportunity to share some information with you tonight about trauma-informed approaches to education. I have with me today Ms. Ann Perryman, our district health coordinator, Dr. Joe Bargion, our lead psychologist, Dr. David Fink, licensed psychologist and also vice president of residential services at USpiritus, Ms. Danielle Randall, principal at Simple Elementary, and Ms. Carrie Thompson, first grade teacher at Simple Elementary. And our next slide shows how our trauma-informed work aligns to the strategies within our Vision 2020. And when we look at trauma-informed, the main premise for being trauma-informed is a paradigm shift. So instead of focusing on what is wrong with the student, we need to shift our thinking to focus on what has happened to the student. And this is the pyramid that you've seen before. It's based on our multi-tier system of support model, and it shows supports that each student can receive at various levels according to their need.
Okay, so while commonplace in mental health settings, trauma-informed approaches are relatively new in a school setting. And these are some of the model school districts that we identified within JCPS, and we have started to model our programming and initiatives around trauma-informed care around those particular school models. Here is just a quick timeline of our trauma-informed approaches and resiliency building approaches that we started back in 2012, and we've begun to layer supports around trauma-informed care throughout the years of until now. Back in 2012, we started with the PREPARE model, which is a crisis response program that was developed by the National Association of School Psychologists. It is a best practice program, and we have trained responders throughout the district that are from various role groups like our counselors, our friskies, our social workers, and our psychologists. And one nice thing about this model is not only do we go out and support schools and families and students following a crisis situation, such as the death of a student, is we're using our existing staff and support staff to go out and do that. And I know we've heard a lot tonight about positive behavioral intervention supports, or PBIS. And a recent research article has really advocated that trauma-informed approaches be layered in and incorporated through the multi-tiered framework such as PBIS. And this school year, we have started doing that within PBIS with training and supports, and we're hoping to expand on that in the coming years.
In this next slide, you're going to see is one of the key components of becoming a trauma-informed organization is professional development. So we're providing professional development both for our classified staff and our certified staff. Our professional development is focusing around trauma, secondary trauma, the ACEs study, adverse childhood experiences, self-care, and then also resiliency skills. And to date, we've trained approximately 1,000 JCPS employees on trauma. Whoop, you went too far. One other thing is, as we saw the previous pyramid, we're layering on additional supports, and this slide just tells you a little bit about the mental health counselors. And so since through March 31st, 2016, we have 16 district-based mental health counselors at 18 schools. Their primary services they're providing at those schools are individual and group counseling and consultation. They're also available to provide consultation skills to those schools that don't have a mental health counselor. And the one data point just to share with you, to date until March 31st, there were approximately 1,700 students served by the mental health counselors. This slide here talks about our partnership with Metro Police. Since 2014, the district receives information on families that were exposed to domestic violence. That included children in the home when the police are called out. And so you can see there is approximately close to 18 or 1,900 children in our community who are exposed to domestic violence. Each one of those dots represents a call where the police were called to the home. Okay. And then with this slide is another support we're putting in place is youth mental health first aid. It's really based on the same premise as CPR. If you've ever been trained for CPR, we teach folks to recognize children who may be in mental health distress and then linking them to the appropriate services, whether those services or resources are within the district or out in the community. And we've trained approximately 200 staff so far, and we've also started to train our parents. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment.
The Bounce Coalition is a multi-agency coalition. It's a venture of about 16 or 17 agencies, including Youth Spiritus, as well as JCPS and many other organizations throughout the area. And it was initially funded through a grant from the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. I'm going to take a moment to review the early stages of this grant. The RFP for this grant asked the host agency, which for us was the health department, to convene a coalition of partnering agencies, the goal being to identify one health area in your area's youth that coalition was going to improve. In the initial year of the grant, there were 5 recipients around the state. Our coalition was the only one that chose resiliency building. And it's the thinking behind that I think is important to talk about. We did, similar to the other agencies, we did talk about other traditional health issues like obesity, substance abuse, domestic violence, community violence. But as our conversations progressed, our thinking transformed, and we began looking at things such as the ACEs study and the implications of adverse childhood experiences on long-term health effects, as well as awareness of the significant impact that trauma has on learning in the classroom and behavior in the school. I should mention that representatives of JCPS, such as Dr. Bargione, Ms. Perryman, Dr. Winch, have been with us since the coalition's inception and have been instrumental in our teamwork in developing the goals of creating a trauma-informed school and also working with out-of-school time providers. We used research from the Trauma and Learning Policy Institute at Harvard Law School and data from the Comprehensive School Survey, including additional measures such as suspension, teacher turnover, attendance, prevalence of behavior incident logs, excuse me, to identify a good match for our program. Semple Elementary, with the compassionate and dedicated leadership of Principal Randall and her staff, are absolutely that match. We engaged the school in the Bounce project on multiple levels. We met with certified and classified staff in training on trauma-informed principles, helping them identify signs of trauma, the effects of trauma, and recognizing the need for self-care practices. I want to mention here that the goal of the Bounce Coalition isn't to help staff diagnose trauma. That is not the goal at all. The goal is to help staff recognize the importance of understanding where a child comes from and how that relates to their needs and to their behaviors in the classroom. We also looked at notions such as self-care practices, which have an impact upon a teacher's ability to manage in a classroom setting. At the same time, the school counselor met with each child in the classroom setting and did similar trauma building and trauma-sensitive activities. Principal Randall will talk about some of the effects and we had some very robust results from the first year. We are now in our second year and have expanded our work there to include a better approach with parent outreach and also doing things such as mindfulness training for the teachers, which help the teachers, but the teachers also use the mindfulness exercises with the youth in their classrooms. So it was a very nice touch. I'll also add that there was a nice anecdote in our training that we did with the bus drivers, and Ms. Perriman and I did most of those trainings, in which a bus driver pointed out in between our first and second training that there had been a youth that had been misbehaving on the bus that prior to our training would have been identified as a bad youth or misbehaving and probably would have received discipline. And instead, the bus driver approached that youth in a different manner. What they found was that the youth had indeed a traumatic event, and the youth was connected to the necessary services as opposed to, just being disciplined. It's also important to remember that when we talk about trauma-informed principles in the classroom, we're talking about giving kids choice and voice. We're talking about maintaining high expectations. We're not talking about allowing misbehaviors. As you may know, we are primed to begin implementing the Bounce project at our second elementary school this coming fall, which is Wheatley Elementary, and we're very excited about the continuation of this project.
Good evening. I think that Bounce has really given a lot to Simple. One of the main things that we can take away is just what David was speaking on. It hasn't allowed the staff to, it's not our job to say or diagnose a student with any type of disability, but what it has done is allowed my teachers to be more aware of the barriers that our students face. During some of our conversations that we've had this year as a staff, I do believe that with the Bounce training and the support, our staff has worked harder at making sure, recognizing that suspension is not the answer, that we have to put more things in place in order to support students. But with that being said, I do feel like as a principal, without this training, being able to continue without training district-wide, I don't know how we can expand on the practice of making sure that teachers come aware of what is going on with our students, the barriers that our students face. I can just speak for Simple, but as well as my colleagues, some of our schools are faced with extreme circumstances. We got a student in maybe 3 weeks ago that parents had been abusing him. He was living in a dog kennel. I'm not sure. I'm a graduate from Western Kentucky University. I did not get that training at Western, how to deal with situations like that and make sure that he is able to learn on a day-to-day basis. I do believe that the training that we have received, the mindfulness training that our staff has received, the ACEs training that our staff has received, has really impacted just, again, the staff being aware, being able to branch out and use the resources that are available, that have been presented to us with Bounce, has really impacted not just student achievement, but the healthiness of our students, the healthiness of my teachers. This is my 5th year as the principal of Simple Elementary, and I don't have any teachers. My transfer list, rather, has always been limited for the amount of teachers who have wanted to transfer into Simple. We now have 15 teachers on our transfer list and only 1 teacher who's wanting to transfer out. So our teacher turnover has grown tremendously, and I contribute a lot of that to just us being able to work together as a family and using the resources that have been provided to us.
I've been teaching first grade at Simple for 12 years, kindergarten and first grade, and I always knew that we had a special brand of kiddos at our school. One of the things that through the Bounce training that I have learned is to look a little deeper with the kids. I have worked with my current group of kiddos for 2 years, and as through the training and I started looking at my kiddos a little closer, I realized probably at least 10 to 12 out of my 24, 25 kids had been through some type of trauma. And 2 little boys in particular within my class this year we've been working really closely with who have had some major trauma in their past and within the last year or so. And it's really given me a different outlook on how to work with these kiddos who would have in the past been put into more behavior interventions for just pure behavior, where now we can look at the root cause of their behaviors and start working more with their guardians. One is being raised by a great aunt, one is being raised by grandparents, with some very not so good influences from the parents in the situation, which have caused a lot of trauma for both of these young men. And it's been given us the opportunity to work with these two boys in a little bit different way to help them hopefully work through some of these issues rather than them going down the path of being a behavior issue throughout their education, and being able to give them some skills to help them cope with the things that they're going through.
That concludes the presentation, or where are we going from here? Still more?
Well,
okay, sorry.
We can have one more moment to back up.
Yep.
To just quickly show some of the data that Dr. Winch from the data planning of JCPS, the data department, the data department at JCPS is our program evaluator, and she has presented this graph for us that shows the Semple Elementary compared to a control school. And actually, I don't know the name of the control school. All I know about it is that it is similar in SES, similar in size, similar in some of the other variables that we had identified at the beginning of our study. And what you'll find is that the number of intensive behavioral logs decreased, the number of suspensions decreased, and all of the measures outperformed the control school in the 2 years that we've had this study. The next slide shows, or the slide before that rather, shows the teachers' perceptions of their own skill level in being able to deal with students who have had traumatized events. And I just thought that these two slides were important just to point out that in addition to the stories that we told that are important, we've talked about evidence-based information, and this shows that there is indeed data to back up the benefits of this program.
If you can just pull up the next steps. Just what we hope to do with our next steps is kind of expand some of the current practices we have in place. One of the key components is that professional development, so we hope to do more professional development on trauma and the youth mental health first aid. And then also another area we want to kind of beef up is with the use of our technology and the website, is put more resources on the website that revolve around trauma, and so we'll be doing that. And then also the Louisville Link Initiative, that's with the police department, as I previously mentioned. When that information comes into the district, we then reach out to the schools where those children go to and work with the leadership at those schools to support those students. But another thing with that data, when we analyze it, there are certain communities where there's a higher rate of domestic violence than others. So we're actually reaching out into those communities and providing training opportunities for the leaders in those communities, and then also those natural helpers on the same premise as CPR, recognize the signs of domestic violence, and then linking those families to resources in the community to support them. The other thing, as David mentioned, we're expanding Bounce to a second elementary school, which we're excited about for this 16-17 school year. And then the last piece about the policy integration is really looking at the decisions we make using a trauma lens in those kinds of decision making. And when we're looking at policy changes, those kinds of things. So that's a key piece too, to keep that trauma lens focused on when we're making changes. I think that concludes our presentation.
Okay, thank you. Before we get into the question and answer period, just a quick announcement. I just got word that a severe thunderstorm warning has been issued for Jefferson County. You guys can consult your phones if you want and look at the weather maps and see where it is. But if anyone would like to move into the hallway, that is the designated spot for students to go in the event of a weather emergency. So there, I don't think, are any students in here, so our plan is to go ahead and continue, but severe thunderstorm warning. That concludes the weatherman portion. So are there questions for our panel here? Lisa.
So you guys are singing my song, so thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. So you talked about, Joe, at the beginning, you talked about, I think you've got about 1,000 folks who've had some training. Could you tell us a little bit about the distinction between, you know, getting like a one-shot training and making a whole school trauma-informed, and maybe what kind of support you would need from the board to see more of this? I mean, I'm hearing improved teacher retention, improved teacher happiness, reduced disciplinary referrals. So it's all the good stuff that's right here in our strategic plan.
Sure. What we're trying to do, what we know from the literature tells us, doing a one-shot professional development doesn't work, where you have to kind of revisit those issues. And so what we're trying to do is to actually build that in where we're providing professional development both to role groups at the role group level, like academic support staff, the psychologists, the counselors, the social workers, but then also at the individual school level. And we're working with the principals when we're invited in to come in for the training. And we'll talk about what components of that trauma-informed care do you think we need to address first. And so we're coming up with plans. We're working with some of the other schools that we kind of provide similar, kind of using the Project Balance as a model, where you provide an overview first, but then you continue to revisit those key components on the trauma-informed care. So it'll be an ongoing process that we'll have to build into the system.
What support do you need from this board to have more of these kinds of experiences for our students?
I think actually the one thing I would encourage you folks to do as you're looking at your policy decision making, using that trauma-informed lens, as when you're making decisions, I think that would be an important step.
Okay, others? Chris?
That's okay. All right, so a couple of points here. One, I'm really surprised to really see the number of students served, 1,700 students. That seems to be really low, especially considering the next slide you talk about there being over 1,800 domestic violence type of responses. I know we're only serving, what, 18 different locations with 16 different mental health counselors. Is that because of the limited number of mental health counselors that we have, but then they're pretty much full? Am I reading into that correctly?
That data point of the 1,700, those are at only those schools where those mental health counselors, like their home schools, that's only the services they're actually providing to those individual students. It doesn't include like the consultations they're providing at other district schools.
Okay,
Yeah.
because and I'm also kind of surprised a little bit by the number of mental health counselors that we have as being 16, because you divide that out, you're going to have a caseload of over 106 plus students per counselor, and in the business world, if you will, mental health counselors have nowhere near that type of caseload. I mean, there's usually, and I'm going to defer to my colleague who knows way more about this than I do, but I'm going to say, what, between 80 and 100 or something, it seems like?
David, I'm sure you know this better than I do, but I think 80 to 100 in a community mental health center setting, which is, already, that's a huge caseload.
Yes, I worked at 7 counties for 17 years, so that's the reference to that. That an average caseload at 7 county services would be about 50 at a time. I mean, that's considered that's considered an average caseload, 50 at a time. Now, you don't see those youth for the entire year, so you might serve more than that over the course of a year, but that's a heavy caseload.
All right, and and it also strikes me because I went to the NSBA, National School Boards Association conference a few weeks back, when just at the end of spring break in Boston, and I had the opportunity to tour a school called Tech Boston Academy, and this particular school. It dealt with technology, but use it as a tool, not as a focus. And one of the things that I found there is they had all these other support services that are wrapped around these kids. Now, this is a 6th through 12th grade high school. And one of the interesting things about this is, one, they had a graduation rate of over 90%, which is pretty impressive. Their school mirrored a lot of our priority schools as far as their student makeup. A lot of ESL kids. It's a majority minority school. It would be a typical school that we would see in some of our priority school settings. The thing that I found, one of the things I found interesting was that they had 2 counselors per grade level for each of their grades. And they school at around almost 900 to 1,000 students in it. And those counselors actually stayed with the grade and followed the grades as they progressed through their high school career. Now, I don't know if both of those counselors were mental health counselors, but considering the amount and breadth of wraparound services that that school offers, and you can look it up online if you'd like, I would not be surprised if there is some type of blended, maybe one mental health counselor per grade level or some type of combination thereof. I wish that we would see that not only in our priority schools or high schools, but across our entire district. I know that's a matter of money and resources. I get that. But it seems that that ties into a lot of what we discussed earlier this afternoon of the code of conduct. If we want to not have suspensions, and I certainly don't, I don't know a board member up here that wants anybody to be suspended, but if we don't want to have that and we want to keep them in the classroom, it seems to me, and we're going to be using PBIS as our primary tool here, then it seems to me that we need to have some type of trauma-informed services or support to be able to support that, and I just don't see that getting done with 16 mental health counselors in the district.
And I'd like to just speak to that quickly. In addition to our 16 mental health counselors, we have great partnerships with our community partners. So some of our students are serviced through 7 counties. We utilize mobile assessment units. So we have other resources available. So because, the 16 is, that does create a large caseload. So we reach out to our partners and we're collaborating. Joe is on the the committee for 7 counties, and they meet regularly to talk about cases and how they can support students. So we are looking and servicing our kids through other resources as well.
Okay. I will also say just 2 more points, and I'm trying to be brief, but as a parent, I hear this all the time, and also as a board member, it comes to me as well. But there are a number of, I get this comment from both parents and from teachers where it was mentioned before, you're not able to diagnose kids, with certain learning disabilities because you just don't have that type of background or certification. Totally understand that, but there are a number of teachers that want to have some way of being able to convey that information to their parents, and there's parents out there that wish that the teacher or someone could say, hey, we think your kid might be ADHD or might be autistic or something along those lines, or have somewhere along that spectrum. And I know that's kind of a thin line because you don't want to get into that diagnosis when you're not qualified. I totally understand that. But there seems to be a lack of support or services or some type of communication that maybe mental health counselors can bridge, set up a gap there that we can do that and try and get our, those parents that need those extra supports in with other services that are throughout the county. I mean, I know the Razor Institute at U of L is an excellent resource. Not many people know about that for ADHD kids. But, and lastly, Principal Randall, I want to agree with you. Western, as a fellow Hilltopper, does not probably do a very good job of doing trauma-informed services because, a lot of your student teachers are going to do student teaching at Warren Central or Glasgow or Barron County. Not exactly an urban school setting that you have here in Louisville. In fact, we're kind of the outlier, of course, with that. Dr. Avert, I don't know if there's anything we can do if we have a coordinator that communicates to our local universities and our teacher pool, especially considering Western used to be a teacher college and has a strong education program. But if we can reach out to them and say, look, we need you to start teaching this because by and large, a lot of these new teachers, where are they going to go? Priority school. And they're going to need that classroom management experience, and they're not getting that in school. And like, our CBO talked about earlier, where we're maybe throwing them into the school a day before or 3 days before they're supposed to start. Where are they going to get ramped up for that? Where is that going to come from? And then that just increases to the amount of churn that we have for new teachers in there. So my question is, if we can try and get to a point where we can communicate that out, I'd really like to see if we might be able to do that. That's it. Thank you.
I know I wasn't asked, but let me just take 2 quick points. One is when you talked about the code of conduct. One of the activities for the Bounce Coalition as well in creating a trauma-informed school is to look at the codes of conduct. And what you will find is the codes of conduct are not very trauma-informed in general. And that is something that when Dr. Bargiron talks about thinking about that in terms of policy, it really would, I think, be wise if if trauma-informed principles are something that you want to be looking at across the board in schools, that the code of conduct be looked at in that regard, because then you're able to set a stage where you're not necessarily encouraging suspensions. And I think that that's just something to be thinking about. The other piece I will just say to you briefly, because in addition to the trainings at Simple, I've done multiple trainings in schools, and you would be alarmed at the number of teachers who had absolutely no behavior management training in their academic world. Let alone what it's like to then work into the real world. But it's just not part of the curriculum, and that's a very good point. It's just not, it's not central part of the curriculum in most universities, is my experience from these trainings.
Steph.
That was my question. It seems like, looking at the different policies that the school board has, we have so many. We've got conduct on school buses, student behavior, care of school and personal property, use of physical restraint and seclusion, assault and threats of violence, student rights, harassment, discrimination, student discipline code. And so there's the one that directs us to do the code of conduct, but it does seem as a board that before we can really address the specifics in a code of conduct, we as a board need to get it together and look at this trauma enlightened, have that be an overall policy of the entire board. And so we have about 500 policies. This code of conduct is not one of our 500. It's a subcategory of the student discipline code. So I would love to see, the board, Donna, if we could look at, looking at our policy as an overarching, and I don't know if you can talk to that a little bit, could we look at our peer districts, or, as a board, how could we organize around something like that?
Can you summarize what the question or the request is, please?
I don't mind if you do.
Donna summarize it. Yeah.
Well, actually, what I heard you say is, how do you put in policy the expectation that this system of support will exist for schools? And it's the expectation of the board. So that is a good avenue to look at, is what districts have expectations stated in policies. And the other part is, you're looking at what part of the entire system of support is this. These things are not isolated things. They all work together. So as I think Mr. Brady said, it's preventative. So those are the two things: describe a system and have that system supported in policy.
Could we, what is the process? I'm a new board member, so what's the process to, look at a policy, a new policy for student, overall, the expectation? How would we go about doing this? What do we?
It comes from staff and gets vetted by staff and then comes to the board. So we will look at that.
Is there a motion to receive the report? Okay, Dr. Wilner, seconded by Chris. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The last information item is a report of the 2016 regular session of the Kentucky General Assembly. Thank you, panelists, by the way. Appreciate it. And Dr. Hargens, you want to introduce our speaker on that?
Absolutely. I'll just remind everybody that as we began the session, our legislative agenda was support, obviously funding KTRS, superintendent authority, and flexibility in assessments. So Mr. Lowe is going to give kind of a brief update of what happened in the session. So you see the legislative agenda up on the screen.
So as Dr. Hargan said, we had 4 items on the legislative agenda, and I think overall we can say that we made good progress on a number of fronts, and no progress on one of them, but overall I think we can be quite pleased with where we landed. The first item was about providing the superintendent greater authority to select principals. I'm pleased, as you well know, House Bill 184 passed, and Representative Jeff Donahue was primary sponsor. He was here tonight, and you know, we express our appreciation to him for his leadership. And then in the Senate, Senator Dan Syme was the person who kind of took the lead on making sure. And essentially that gives the superintendent of Jefferson County Public Schools additional authority to use an alternative way to bring forward a candidate for the district. So we're very pleased with that that outcome, and we think that that will give Dr. Hargens the opportunity to put the right leaders in the right schools. The next item was about develop and implement a solution to the unfunded pension liability. I have to say that the work of the General Assembly was pretty impressive. This is the first time in my recollection that they got pretty serious about putting real money against a huge unfunded liability. And so they wound up putting about $1.2 billion of new funding across all systems.
Jonathan, I hate to ask you this, but the acoustics in here aren't really the best. And you're really great and you know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Can you talk slower just
Sure.
so that we're kind of not having to deal with the delay or the reverb as much? I'm sorry.
We've got to bounce off the back wall.
Okay,
That's the problem.
my apologies. I will slow down.
You're fine. It's not your fault.
Yeah. As I was saying, House Bill 303 provides significant additional resources against the unfunded liability for the retirement systems, and that essentially they pushed additional general fund dollars against the ARC contribution, the actually required contribution, in significant levels. They did not use bonding to do that. As you may recall, last year there was a proposal to use to borrow money to pay debt, and that was not done this year, which is significantly different. The other thing is, if there is a surplus this year, a portion of that is to go to the Permanent Pension Fund and 25% to the KTRS pension liability. So they're forward thinking. If that continues over a number of biennia, you know, we can make a significant dent in that challenge. The next item that we had on our legislative agenda was about assessment and accountability models. House Bill 92 was Representative Clark's bill that would have allowed districts of innovation to apply for waivers for innovative assessment tools. It aligns very well with our strategic plan, so we were very supportive. It passed the House unanimously. No action was taken in the Senate. I think that there are two things maybe in play there. One is that the Senate had Senate Bill 1, which was a significant piece of legislation dealing with assessment and accountability. So if there were a vehicle, that was the one that they were wanting. Also, as you know, between reauthorization of the ESSA, a new commissioner, the reassessment on what our assessment and accountability system would look like, I think there was a sense that there's an opportunity for this kind of innovation, but that it's a little premature. And as the assessment and accountability restructuring goes on over the next 18 months, our hope is that JCPS will be at the table helping to craft a system that aligns with your strategic plan, our strategic plan on assessment and accountability issues. Just a couple of notes on a couple of interesting and key pieces of legislation. One is about creating a work-ready Kentucky scholarship program. This would allow a new scholarship program for dual credit students to receive scholarship funding to support that, and then you know, moving on into post-secondary education. The details of that, I think, are still to be finalized in administrative regulation, but I wanted to bring it up because it'll be on our radar, and it connects with, you know, our focus on making sure that kids are college and career ready. As I mentioned before, Senate Bill 1 was a significant piece of legislation relating to assessment and accountability. It did pass the Senate pretty much along party lines. The House chose not to adopt it, and I think that some of the ideas and issues that were in that bill will continue to play out as we do restructuring of the assessment and accountability system on the executive side. Just to mention that the charter schools legislation was considered and passed in the Senate. It did not get any action in the House. And then finally, relating to the executive branch budget, you know, we had a goal to get funding increases. Where we landed was, with the exception of the comment that Ms. Harden talked about on preschool, pretty much held harmless. The SEEK is at current year levels, and they also did a thing where if the appropriation is not sufficient to cover the per pupil amount, which sometimes happens, the additional funds is considered a necessary government expense, which means that we're not going to get a mid-year cut, which has happened before. A second thing that they did this year that is helpful for our budgeting purposes is that they did not require a mandatory salary increase. So that's left at the discretion of each school district. And then the Strand grant programs were kept at current levels. Finally, as Ms. Harden said, there's a program that would establish enrollment eligibility for pre-K up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And, you know, there are some challenges regarding increased enrollments and flat funding. There was also $7.5 million each year to create a grant program to incentivize public-private cooperation. This is one of those things that's in a budget that doesn't have much flesh to it, and so it gets in there, the appropriation is there, and then sort of it gets built out after the fact, so we'll have to kind of make sure that we understand what the opportunities that creates. Similarly, the Education and Workforce Development Cabinet has $100 million in bond pool. My understanding is that they're going to be working on sort of advanced manufacturing stuff, and Jefferson Community Technical College is in the mix for a piece of that, and you know, I'm hoping and expecting that JCPS will be kind of at the table in the planning portion of that. And then I thought was interesting, just as we took on a comprehensive facilities evaluation for JCPS, the state is going to take $2 million in each year to do a statewide evaluation of school facilities. The last time they did that was in 2011, and in years past, when there was more money for direct bonding for school facilities using state money, that list was used as an opportunity for prioritize. Finally, just there were a couple of JCPS specific grants that I wanted to mention. One is the Georgia Chaffee TAP program, where funding is kept at the current level. And then the Everyone Reads program funding was cut by 50% each year of the biennium. There's also language regarding KDE reporting annually on performance outcomes for a series of those grant programs, including those two. And then just to note, on the budget, the governor has until tomorrow to make line item vetoes, so that potentially some of this could change. He can't change like the bottom line dollar amount of what has been appropriated. He can, however, line out a particular item that says you will spend that money in this particular way. So, and that's my presentation.
Thank you, Jonathan. Are there questions? Chris.
Okay, we'll see how that works. All right, so my question is not necessarily to John, but to our superintendent. Jonathan, if you go back to slide 10, the education and workforce bonds that was mentioned there says it provides $100 million pool for workforce development. KSBA this past weekend, when I was at their board retreat, we discussed the agenda or the past session, and one of the things that they brought out was that each congressional district gets part of this $100 million, and no more than 25% of this $100 million can be spent in any particular congressional district. I don't know what the process is to be able, and the idea is also for these projects to be what they refer to as shovel-ready, in other words, ready to go. But I don't know what the process is, but if there, I would imagine that we probably, and maybe you do know, but that we would have someone who can be on top of this to make sure that we can be at first in the door, or at least really close to first in the door, to be able to get our proposal, to be able to, you know, get this, some of this pool of money into the district.
We definitely are watching this, and we'll keep an eye on what exactly we need to do. This aligns, I think, very well with the direction of the district in Vision 2020, so we want to make sure we stay aligned. And Secretary of Workforce Development Ramsey also wants to work with us, and Secretary Heiner. So those are two key people that we need to stay connected to.
I just want to make sure that I understand the main points here. Of our 4 top priorities, superintendent authority over principal, that was a success. On the funding of the retirement system, good progress. On alternative assessment methodologies, really no progress, passed in one house, failed in another. And on money, assuming that the operating money, assuming the governor doesn't veto anything, we lost a little ground. SEEK formula held flat with last year. All the grant programs held flat. Costs continue to march up, so we're going to get nibbled at some. We didn't really get any kind of additional money to keep up with rising costs.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I always think as well in sort of the overall context. There are lots of other parts of the state budget that got, 4.5% cut and then a 9%, just significant additional cuts. And so I think the General Assembly actually worked quite hard to reduce the impact on K-12 education. Right.
So when we think about the sort of preliminary recommendation that we heard earlier in the work session about salary increases and stuff, the context there is that the state has chosen to fund the retirement system really, and not to fund fully the operating expenses. Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to receive this report? Mr. Brady moves. Ms. Duncan looks like she's going to second. All in favor? Passes unanimously. Thank you.